I'll never forget the look on Tiffany Rhodes's face when her voice finally failed her. For 3 years, I'd listened to that voice announce problems that became my responsibility, take credit for my solutions, and charm our boss into believing she was irreplaceable. But in that boardroom, surrounded by executives whose expressions shifted from skepticism to shock as they reviewed my evidence, Tiffany Rhodes was finally, gloriously silent. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me start at the beginning. My name is Claire Mitchell, and until 6 weeks ago, I was the invisible backbone of Horizon Logistics Operations Department in Seattle. Not that anyone would have described me that way. Officially, I was just another operations supervisor reporting to Stephen Marshall, our vice president of operations. But ask anyone who actually got things done, and they'd point you my way. I wasn't always this bitter. When I joined Horizon 3 years ago, fresh from completing my MBA while working full-time at a smaller company, I was thrilled. Horizon was expanding rapidly, handling logistics for some of the biggest tech companies in the Pacific Northwest. The salary was good, the benefits better, and the opportunity for growth seemed unlimited. Then I met Tiffany. She'd been hired 2 weeks before me as Stephen's executive assistant. With her perfect blowouts, designer clothes, and confident stride, Tiffany looked like she'd stepped out of a corporate fashion magazine. In meetings, she'd slide effortlessly between taking detailed notes and offering Stephen whispered suggestions that made him nod appreciatively. Her laugh, a practiced musical sound, seemed to follow him around the office like a soundtrack. I still remember our first real interaction. I'd been at Horizon for about a month when Stephen called me into his office. Seated beside him was Tiffany, her eyes red-rimmed despite flawless makeup. "Claire?" Stephen said, his voice unusually gentle. "Tiffany's going through some personal issues right now. Her mother's been hospitalized, and she needs to take some time off." Tiffany dabbed at her eyes with a tissue. "I hate leaving everyone in the lurch like this," she said, her voice breaking slightly, "especially with the Anderson account deliverables due next week." "That's where you come in, Claire," Stephen continued. "I need you to handle Tiffany's reports for the Anderson presentation, just until she's back on her feet." I nodded, of course. What else could I do? Someone was in crisis, and I was a team player. "You're a lifesaver," Tiffany whispered, squeezing my arm as we left Stephen's office. "I owe you one." That night, I stayed until 9 p.m. figuring out Tiffany's filing system and deciphering her notes. The Anderson report was barely started, and what existed was riddled with errors. I canceled weekend plans with friends and worked through Saturday and Sunday to complete it. When Monday came, Tiffany was back looking refreshed. No mention of her mother. Instead, she cheerfully announced she'd had the most amazing spa weekend at a resort outside the city. I told myself I'd misunderstood the situation. Maybe her mother had recovered quickly. Maybe the spa trip was therapeutic after her stress. Stephen loved the Anderson report. "Excellent work, team," he said in the morning meeting, his eyes lingering on Tiffany. She smiled modestly and murmured something about putting in the extra effort. I said nothing. After all, I'd only been at the company a month. There would be time to establish myself, but there wasn't. 2 months later, Tiffany developed terrible migraines that prevented her from completing the quarterly operations review. 3 months after that, she had family drama that coincided precisely with year-end reporting. Each time, Stephen would call me in, explain that Tiffany needed support, and assign me her work on top of my own. And each time, I'd deliver. I'd stay late, come in early, work weekends. I missed my sister's baby shower because Tiffany had emergency dental surgery the day before a major client presentation. I canceled a vacation because Tiffany had a bad reaction to a new medication during budget planning season. Yet somehow Tiffany always recovered in time for the praise. She'd stand beside Stephen as he complimented the team's efforts, nodding and adding insightful comments about work she hadn't done. In performance reviews, Stephen noted my solid contributions, but raved about Tiffany's exceptional initiative and critical problem-solving. I told myself it was fine. I was building experience, proving my worth through results rather than office politics. I was the professional one, the adult in the room. My time would come. Then, last month, it happened again, only worse. I was updating inventory projections when I heard Tiffany's voice rise above the office hum. She was standing by Stephen's door, one hand resting protectively over her still flat stomach, the other gesturing dramatically as she spoke to a small crowd of coworkers. "It wasn't planned, but we're over the moon," she was saying, her smile radiant. "Little Sophia's going to have a baby brother or sister." The chorus of congratulations was immediate. Tiffany soaked it in, nodding and thanking people with practiced humility. Then her eyes met mine across the room, and something flickered in them, something calculating and cold that vanished so quickly I might have imagined it. But I hadn't imagined it, because later that afternoon, Stephen called me into his office. Tiffany was there, seated in the visitor's chair, looking uncharacteristically subdued. "Claire," Stephen began, "I'm sure you've heard Tiffany's wonderful news." I nodded, my stomach already nodding with the certainty of what was coming. "The thing is," he continued, "with Tiffany's condition, we need to be careful about her stress levels. And with the Phoenix project launching next month, plus the board review coming up, you need me to take over her responsibilities." I finished for him, my voice flat. "Just temporarily," Tiffany chimed in, her eyes wide with manufactured gratitude. "It's just that with this pregnancy, the doctor says it's high risk given my age. I need to be so careful. And you're so good at handling these things, Claire." I looked at her, really looked at her, at the woman who'd used every excuse from migraines to family emergencies to dump her work on me, who'd taken credit for my late nights, my sacrificed weekends, my canceled vacations, who was now using her pregnancy, her second in 3 years, as the latest in a long line of reasons why someone else should do her job. And something inside me, some dam of patience and professionalism and misplaced loyalty, finally broke. "No," I said. The silence that followed my refusal was so complete I could hear the soft hum of the air conditioning. Stephen blinked at me like I'd suddenly started speaking in tongues. Tiffany's perfectly glossed mouth opened slightly in shock. "I'm sorry," Stephen said finally, leaning forward in his chair. I said no. My voice was steadier than I felt. "I won't be taking on Tiffany's responsibilities again." Tiffany recovered first. "Claire," she said, her tone dripping with concern, "I understand you're under a lot of pressure with your own work, but this is a team environment, and sometimes we need to support each other during—" "Support each other?" I cut her off, feeling a strange, reckless energy surging through me. "Is that what you call it when one person does all the, work and another takes all the credit? Because that's not my definition of teamwork, Tiffany." Stephen's face darkened. "That's enough, Claire. I understand you're stressed, but Tiffany is in a delicate condition, and as her colleague, I expected more compassion from you." I looked at him then, this man who'd been my boss for 3 years, who'd never once noticed that every deadline Tiffany met had my fingerprints all over it, who'd promoted her twice while keeping me in the same position despite consistently praising our team's results. "With all due respect, Stephen, Tiffany's condition doesn't change the fact that I've been doing 2 jobs for 3 years. I've covered for her during family emergencies that miraculously coincided with her tropical vacations. I've stayed until midnight, fixing reports she couldn't complete because of migraines that didn't stop her from attending concerts the same evening. I've missed important events in my own life to salvage deadlines she ignored until the last minute." Tiffany's face had gone from shocked to something harder, colder. "That's not true," she said, her voice tight. "Stephen, she's completely misrepresenting." "I can prove every word," I interrupted, surprising even myself with my certainty. "Every email where you dumped your work on me at the last minute. Every deadline you missed that I covered for. Every time you took credit for my solutions in meetings." Stephen held up his hands. "Let's all take a breath here. Claire, I think you're blowing this out of proportion. We're simply asking you to help a colleague during a difficult time." "No," I said again, standing up. "You're asking me to continue enabling behavior that should have been addressed years ago. I'm done being the safety net for someone who never does her job." I walked to the door, then turned back. "I'll continue doing my job, the one I was actually hired for. But I will not take on a single task that belongs to Tiffany, not one report, not one client call, not one spreadsheet. If that's a problem, you'll have to find someone else to exploit." As I left Stephen's office, the weight of what I'd just done crashed over me. I'd effectively told the VP of operations, a man known for valuing loyalty above almost everything else, that his judgment was flawed and his favorite employee was a fraud. In the corporate world, that kind of honesty wasn't brave. It was career suicide. Back at my desk, my hands shook as I unlocked my computer. Colleagues glanced my way curiously. They'd obviously heard raised voices from Stephen's office, a rarity in our carefully curated professional environment. I focused on my screen, trying to ignore the heat in my cheeks and the pounding of my heart. An email notification popped up almost immediately. A meeting. Request from Stephen for 8 a.m. the next morning. No agenda, no explanation. just the subject line. Regarding today's discussion. I accepted it without comment and tried to focus on my actual work. But my mind kept racing through possibilities, none of them good. Best case scenario, I'd be formally reprimanded. Worst case, I'd be fired. The job market was tight and Horizon was a respected name in the industry. Would Stephen blackball me? Would 3 years of exemplary work be erased by one moment of standing up for myself? By 6 p.m., the office had emptied, but I remained at my desk. Not working late for once, just delaying going home to an empty apartment where I'd spiral through worst-case scenarios all night. As I finally gathered my things, I noticed the light still on in Stephen's office. Through the glass wall, I could see him deep in conversation with Tiffany. She was gesturing emphatically, her face set in lines of righteous indignation. Stephen nodded gravely. I didn't need to hear their words to know they were planning my professional execution. The next morning, I arrived early, determined to face whatever was coming with dignity. I'd spent half the night drafting my resume, and the other half compiling emails, hundreds of them, that documented the truth of what I'd told Stephen. I didn't expect him to review them, but I needed to know I'd done everything possible to defend myself. Stephen was already in his office when I knocked at precisely 8 a.m. He looked up, his expression unreadable, and gestured me inside. "Sit down, Claire," he said, his tone formal. I complied, keeping my back straight and my expression neutral. "I've been reviewing some concerning information," he began, shuffling papers on his desk. "Tiffany came to me after our discussion yesterday with some serious allegations about your recent conduct." My stomach dropped. "What allegations?" "She claims you've been deliberately undermining her work, deleting files, withholding information, changing deadlines without informing her." He looked up at me. "She says you've been setting her up to fail because you resent her relationship with management." I stared at him, momentarily speechless. Not only was Tiffany not taking responsibility for her actions, she was now actively trying to destroy me for refusing to continue covering for her. "That's absolutely false," I said finally, my voice low but firm. "In fact, it's the opposite of the truth. I've been supporting Tiffany's work for years, often at the expense of my own responsibilities and certainly my personal life." Stephen's expression didn't change. "She's filed a formal complaint with HR. Given the seriousness of the allegations and your outburst yesterday, I have no choice but to escalate this to the executive team." "Fine," I heard myself say, even as panic clawed at my throat. "Do what you need to do, but I'll be bringing my own evidence to that meeting." A flicker of uncertainty crossed Stephen's face. "Evidence?" I nodded. 3 years of emails, text messages, and project logs that show exactly who did the work and who took the credit. I've been keeping records, Stephen, not because I plan to use them, but because I needed to keep track of the actual deadlines Tiffany ignored while I scrambled to meet them. For the first time in our conversation, Stephen looked unsettled. "That won't be necessary. This is just a formality to address Tiffany's concerns." "No," I said, echoing my stance from the day before. "If my job and reputation are on the line because of false accusations, I will defend myself with the truth. All of it." 2 days later, I found myself sitting in the company's main boardroom, facing not just Stephen and the HR director, but the entire executive leadership team, including Patricia Howard, the stern, silver-haired chairwoman known for her uncompromising standards. Tiffany sat across from me, immaculately dressed as always, a thick folder of her own on the table before her. She avoided my eyes, instead focusing on Stephen, who sat beside her like a protective barrier. The meeting began with Tiffany's accusations, delivered in a voice that trembled with just the right amount of emotion. She painted a picture of me as a jealous, vindictive coworker who deliberately sabotaged her while she struggled with health issues and now, a high-risk pregnancy. She described critical files mysteriously altered, emails she never received, deadlines changed without notification. "I tried to be understanding," she concluded, dabbing at her eyes with a tissue. "I know Claire is ambitious, but when projects started failing because of her interference, I had to speak up. It's not just about me anymore." Her hand drifted protectively to her stomach. "I have to. Think about my family." The boardroom hummed with tension as Tiffany finished her performance. I sat still, my hands folded over my own folder, thicker than hers, containing 3 years of meticulous documentation. Every late-night email, every frantic text message, every project handoff she'd dumped on me at the last minute. My digital paper trail of exploitation. Patricia Howard turned to me, her steel gray eyes appraising. Unlike Stephen, who avoided looking at me directly, Patricia's gaze was unflinching. "Ms. Mitchell," she said, her voice carrying the crisp authority that had made her legendary in Seattle's business community. "These are serious allegations. What do you have to say in your defense?" I took a deep breath. This was it. The moment I'd rehearsed in my mind a dozen times. Since that fateful no in Stephen's office. "I'm not here to defend myself, Ms. Howard," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "I'm here to present the truth." I opened my folder and slid a document across the table. A timeline I'd created, meticulously chronicling every major project Tiffany had claimed credit for over the past 3 years, alongside evidence of who had actually completed the work. "For 3 years, I've been doing Tiffany's job in addition to my own," I continued, pulling out a USB drive. "This contains over 400 emails where Tiffany explicitly asked me to complete her assignments, often hours before deadlines she'd known about for weeks." Stephen shifted uncomfortably. "Claire, this isn't—" "Please let Ms. Mitchell finish," Patricia interrupted, her tone leaving no room for debate. She nodded for me to continue. "Every time Tiffany had a family emergency or a health crisis that prevented her from meeting her responsibilities, I stepped in. Not occasionally, not as a favor between colleagues, but systematically. I pulled out printed screenshots from Tiffany's Instagram account. Here she is at the Bellagio in Las Vegas during her grandmother's funeral. Here she is at a Taylor Swift concert the night she had a migraine so severe she couldn't finish the quarterly report." Tiffany's face flushed. "That's an invasion of privacy. You've been stalking my social media?" "No, Tiffany. I've been following the colleague who kept tagging me in comments like, 'Thanks for covering for me again,' while she posted pictures from resort pools." I turned back to, the board. I didn't compile this evidence to attack Tiffany. I kept records because I needed to track the actual status of projects she abandoned. I pulled out one final document, a side-by-side comparison of my performance reviews versus Tiffany's promotions and bonuses over the same period. For 3 years, I've watched Tiffany advance based on work I completed. I've been called a solid team player while she's been praised as exceptional and innovative. I didn't speak up because I believed in doing my job well, regardless of recognition. But when she tried to use her pregnancy, her second in 3 years, as yet another excuse to dump her responsibilities on me, I finally said no. I looked directly at Patricia. The next day, she filed this complaint accusing me of the very sabotage she's been committing against my career for years. The room fell silent. Several board members were flipping through the documents I'd provided, expressions growing increasingly troubled. Stephen stared at his hands. Tiffany's face had gone from flushed to pale. Patricia broke the silence. "Mr. Marshall, were you aware of this arrangement between Ms. Rhodes and Ms. Mitchell?" Stephen cleared his throat. "I knew Claire occasionally helped Tiffany during difficult periods, but nothing to this extent. If what she's claiming is true, I couldn't help interrupting. Every email is dated and time-stamped. Every request is in Tiffany's own words. Every project timeline shows exactly who completed what and when." Patricia held up a hand to silence further debate. "Ms. Rhodes, do you have a response to these allegations?" All eyes turned to Tiffany. For the first time since I'd known her, the polished, confident woman who always had the perfect excuse, the perfect explanation, the perfect deflection, seemed utterly at a loss. She opened her mouth, closed it, then tried again. This is a complete mischaracterization," she managed finally, her voice lacking its usual certainty. "Claire offered to help me. She volunteered. And now she's trying to make it seem like I forced her because she's jealous of my relationship with Stephen and my success in this company." "Your success?" The words escaped me before I could stop them. "Tiffany, what exactly have you succeeded at besides taking credit for other people's work?" "That's enough," Patricia said firmly. "Ms. Rhodes, can you provide any evidence that Ms. Mitchell volunteered for these assignments rather than being directed to complete them?" Tiffany's eyes darted to Stephen, silently pleading for help, but he was focused intently on a water spot on the table. My emails were on my old work account. When I got my promotion, everything transferred to the new one. But Stephen knows. He saw how Claire was always offering to help me." Patricia turned to Stephen, one eyebrow raised in silent question. "I may have created the impression that helping Tiffany was part of Claire's role," he admitted reluctantly. "But I had no idea of the extent. Claire never complained." "Why would I?" I asked quietly. "Every time Tiffany received praise for my work, you made it clear where your loyalty lay. What would have happened if I'd spoken up sooner?" The implication hung heavy in the air. Several board members exchanged glances, and I saw the HR director making notes furiously. "I believe we've heard enough to make an initial assessment," Patricia said after a moment. "I'd like to speak with the board privately. Ms. Mitchell, Ms. Rhodes, please wait outside." As we filed out of the boardroom, I felt strangely calm. For the first time in 3 years, the truth was out. Whatever happened next, even if they fired me, I'd reclaimed my voice. Tiffany and I sat at opposite ends of the waiting area, a chasm of silence between us. She typed frantically on her phone, probably texting Stephen for reassurance. I simply waited, mentally rehearsing what I would say to future employers about why I'd left Horizon Logistics. After 20 minutes that felt like hours, the boardroom door opened. Patricia's assistant gestured us back inside. The atmosphere had shifted. Where before there had been skepticism, now I sensed something different. A collective discomfort, as though the board had uncovered something unpleasant in their company's foundation. "Ms. Rhodes, Ms. Mitchell," Patricia began once. We were seated. "The board has reviewed the evidence presented and conducted a preliminary examination of the email archives. What we found is troubling." She turned to Tiffany, her expression stern. "Ms. Rhodes, the evidence overwhelmingly contradicts your account. In fact, it suggests a pattern of behavior that violates several company policies regarding professional conduct and truthfulness in communications." Tiffany's composure cracked. "But my pregnancy is irrelevant to the matter at hand," Patricia cut her off. "Pregnancy is not a shield for misconduct, nor does it excuse years of misrepresenting your contributions to this company." The color drained from Tiffany's face as the full weight of Patricia's words sank in. Her perfectly manicured hand trembled slightly as she reached for her water glass. "This isn't fair," she protested, her voice rising. "I've given everything to this company. Ask Stephen. He knows how valuable I am to the team." All eyes turned to Stephen, who looked like he wanted to melt into his chair. The VP, who'd always seemed so confident, so certain of his judgment, now couldn't meet anyone's gaze. Patricia's expression remained impassive. "Mr. Marshall, the board has concerns about your role in this situation as well. Your failure to properly oversee your department has created an environment where one employee could systematically take credit for another's work while overburdening that same colleague." "I didn't know the extent," Stephen began. "That's precisely the problem," Patricia interrupted. "As a department head, it was your responsibility to know. Instead, you allowed personal favoritism to cloud your professional judgment." For the first time, I felt a flicker of sympathy for Stephen. He'd been manipulated too, in his own way. Not that it excused his behavior, but Tiffany had played us both. His vanity, my work ethic. Patricia turned back to me, her expression softening slightly. "Ms. Mitchell, I want to apologize on behalf of Horizon Logistics for what you've experienced. No employee should be expected to shoulder another's responsibilities without proper recognition or compensation." The validation, after years of invisible labor, was almost overwhelming. I managed a nod, not trusting my voice. "As for next steps," Patricia continued, addressing the room at large, "the board requires time to determine appropriate actions. However, effective immediately, Ms. Rhodes is suspended pending further investigation into professional misconduct." "Suspended?" Tiffany's voice cracked. "You can't be serious. I'm pregnant." "Your pregnancy entitles you to medical accommodations and protected leave when appropriate." The HR director spoke up for the first time. "It does not exempt you from the consequences of policy violations." "And Mr. Marshall," Patricia continued, "you will meet with HR this afternoon to discuss supervisory retraining and a performance improvement plan." Stephen nodded stiffly, his face ashen. "Ms. Mitchell, please remain available for further discussions as we review the situation more thoroughly." Patricia's tone was businesslike, but I detected a note of respect that had been absent before. "This meeting is adjourned." As we filed out of the boardroom, the reality of what had just happened began to sink in. I'd entered that room expecting to defend my career against false accusations, possibly to lose my job. Instead, Tiffany was suspended, Stephen reprimanded, and I'd been validated. The walk back to my desk felt surreal. Colleagues glanced up as I passed, curiosity evident in their expressions. News traveled fast in our office. They knew something significant had happened, but not what. Not yet. I'd barely sat down when my phone buzzed with a text from Lisa, an analyst in the marketing department who'd become a friend during late nights when we were often the last two people in the building. "You okay? Rumors flying? Lunch today?" I texted back a quick affirmative, then tried to focus on work. But concentration was impossible. Adrenaline still coursed through my system, making my hands slightly unsteady as I typed. 3 years of suppressed frustration, vindicated in a single meeting. It didn't feel real. At noon, I met Lisa at a small cafe 2 blocks from the office, far enough to avoid being overheard by other Horizon employees. "So," she said, as soon as we were seated, "is it true? Tiffany suspended and Stevens on thin ice?" I nodded, still processing it myself. "How did you hear already?" "Tiffany made quite a scene clearing out her desk," Lisa replied, lowering her voice despite the relative privacy, crying, saying everyone was against her, that they'd regret losing her talents. She hesitated. "And she had quite a lot to say. About you." My stomach tightened. "I'm sure she did." "Claire." Lisa leaned forward, her expression serious. "Everyone knows. Not just about today, about everything. How you've been carrying her for years, how Steven played favorites, the deadlines, the late nights, the stolen credit. We've all seen it." I stared at her. If everyone knew, why didn't anyone say anything? Lisa had the grace to look uncomfortable. "Office politics, I guess. Steven made it clear Tiffany was untouchable. And you never complained, so..." She shrugged. "So everyone just watched. I finished for her. Some of us tried to help in small ways," she countered. "Who do you think kept forwarding you the project updates Tiffany forgot to share? Who made sure you were included in meetings Tiffany tried to keep you out of?" I hadn't realized. In my focus on simply keeping my head above water, I'd missed the subtle support system that had formed around me. "Thank you," I said quietly. "I didn't know." "Well, now everyone knows everything," Lisa said, a note of satisfaction in her voice. "And honestly, most people are thrilled. Tiffany stepped on a lot of toes climbing that ladder. Not just yours." We finished lunch, and as we walked back to the office, I felt lighter than I had in years. The burden of silent resentment, of unacknowledged exploitation, had been lifted. Whatever happened next, even if there was professional fallout, I'd reclaimed my dignity. Back at my desk, I found an email from Patricia Howard requesting a meeting the following morning. Despite the validation of the board meeting, anxiety curled in my stomach. Institutional momentum was a powerful force. What if, after reflection, they decided it was easier to let me go than to address the systemic issues Tiffany and Steven represented? I stayed late that evening, not working for once, but organizing my projects so that if tomorrow was my last day, my replacement wouldn't be left scrambling. As I methodically documented processes and status updates, I realized how much institutional knowledge I'd accumulated, how genuinely valuable I was to Horizon, whether they recognized it or not. When I finally left the building at 8 p.m., the office was empty except for the cleaning staff. In the parking garage, I passed Steven's car, still in its reserved spot. He was upstairs somewhere, probably in damage control mode. For the first time in 3 years, his late night wasn't causing one for me. At home, I opened a bottle of wine I'd been saving for a special occasion and poured myself a glass. Whatever tomorrow brought, I'd faced the truth and stood my ground. No one could take that victory from me. The next morning, I arrived early for my meeting with Patricia Howard. The office felt different somehow. Or perhaps I was the one who had changed. Colleagues nodded as I passed, some offering small smiles or murmured greetings. There was a new awareness in their eyes, a recognition I hadn't experienced before. Patricia's office occupied the northeast corner of the executive floor, with floor-to-ceiling windows offering panoramic views of Elliott Bay and the Olympic Mountains beyond. I'd only been there once. Before, during a company-wide reception when I'd first joined Horizon. Then I'd felt like an outsider looking in at the inner sanctum. Now, as Patricia's assistant ushered me through the door, I entered with my head high. Patricia was standing by the window, gazing out at the Seattle skyline. At 58, she cut an imposing figure, tall and straight-backed, her silver hair cropped in a sleek bob that emphasized her sharp features. She turned as I entered, gesturing to the sitting area rather than her desk. "Thank you for coming, Claire," she said, taking a seat in one of the armchairs. "Please sit." I settled across from her, noting the absence of HR representatives or other executives. Whatever this conversation was, it would be just between us. "I want to apologize again for what you've experienced at Horizon," Patricia began, her tone direct but not unkind. "The situation with Ms. Rhodes and Mr. Marshall represents a significant failure of leadership, one that I take personal responsibility for as chairwoman. I hadn't expected this level of accountability from someone at her level." "Thank you," I said simply. After yesterday's meeting, I had our IT department conduct a more thorough review of the email and project management systems, she continued, placing a folder on the coffee table between us. What we found confirms everything you presented, and more. The pattern extends beyond what you documented. More? I echoed, unsure what she meant. Patricia nodded grimly. Ms. Rhodes appears to have engaged in similar behavior with at least 2 other employees before you joined Horizon. Both eventually left the company, citing career advancement opportunities elsewhere. The revelation hit me like a physical blow. There had been others before me, others who had chosen to leave rather than fight. How many careers had Tiffany damaged on her climb upward? That's partly why I wanted to meet with you privately, Patricia continued, to understand why you stayed when others didn't. The question caught me off guard. I'd asked myself the same thing countless times over the years. Why had I endured it for so long? I believed in the work we were doing, I said finally, the truth emerging as I spoke. And I thought that eventually results would speak for themselves. That if I just worked hard enough, was professional enough, the situation would correct itself. Patricia studied me thoughtfully. A common misconception among talented people, especially women, that merit alone will be recognized without self-advocacy. She leaned forward slightly. Claire, what do you want from your career? Not just at Horizon, in the larger sense. Again, not what I'd expected. I'd come prepared to discuss compensation for my extra work or potential restructuring of the department, not my career aspirations. I want to build something meaningful, I answered honestly. I'm good at operations, at seeing the interconnected parts of a system and making them work together more efficiently. I've always wanted to lead a department where everyone's contributions are valued and recognized. Patricia nodded, as though I'd confirmed something she'd already suspected. What would you say if I told you we're creating a new position, Director of Operational Excellence, reporting directly to me, bypassing the current VP structure entirely? My heart skipped a beat, but caution tempered my reaction. I'd ask what the position entails and why it's being created now. A smile tugged at Patricia's lips. A measured response. Good. She opened the folder and pushed a document across to me. This is the proposed organizational chart. The new director would oversee process improvement across all departments, with a mandate to identify inefficiencies and implement solutions. I scanned the chart, noting that the position would have considerable authority and would effectively place me on equal footing with Stephen. You're offering me this position, I said, making it a statement rather than a question. I'm considering you for it, Patricia corrected. You've demonstrated exceptional capability, integrity, and resilience. But I need to know if you're ready for leadership, not just management. There's a difference. And that difference is? Managers coordinate tasks. Leaders build cultures. Patricia's gaze was evaluative. The situation you endured wasn't just about one manipulative employee and one biased supervisor. It was a cultural failure that allowed their behavior to continue unchecked. I need someone who understands that on a visceral level. I thought about the past 3 years, about the silent witnesses, the enabling systems, the unspoken rules that had protected Tiffany and Stephen while exploiting me and others. I do understand it, I said quietly, and I know exactly how I would prevent it from happening again. Tell me. For the next 30 minutes, I outlined my vision. Transparent performance metrics, collaborative credit on projects, regular peer feedback sessions, clear escalation paths for concerns, systems that would make it harder for credit to be stolen or work unfairly distributed. Patricia listened intently, occasionally asking pointed questions that pushed me to refine my thinking. When I finally finished, she sat back, a look of satisfaction on her face. That's exactly what I hoped to hear, she said. The position is yours if you want it. Same benefits package as other directors, salary commensurate with the responsibility. HR will provide the details this afternoon. I should have been elated. Instead, an unexpected question rose to my lips. And Tiffany? Stephen? What happens to them? Patricia's expression turned serious. Ms. Rhodes's employment has been terminated, effective immediately. Mr. Marshall is on probation pending completion of his retraining and improvement plan. She paused. Does that affect your decision? Did it? I searched my feelings, looking for vindictiveness or gloating, but found only a quiet relief that justice had been served. No, I said truthfully. I just wanted to know. Good. Because this promotion isn't about them. It's about you and what you bring to Horizon. As I left Patricia's office, the reality of what had just happened began to sink in. I'd gone from being an overlooked operations supervisor to a director reporting directly to the chairwoman, all because I'd finally said no to an unreasonable demand. Back at my desk, I found an email from HR outlining the details of my new position, including a salary that made my eyes widen. It would start in 2 weeks, giving me time to transition my current projects. As I scrolled through the email, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. When I opened it, my blood ran cold. Congratulations on the promotion. Stealing my job wasn't enough? You had to destroy my career too? You'll regret this. T. I stared at the text, my momentary victory suddenly hollow. Despite everything, the evidence, the termination, the professional consequences, Tiffany still saw herself as the victim, still couldn't acknowledge the reality of what she'd done. After a moment's deliberation, I forwarded the message to Patricia and HR, adding simply, FYI, I won't be responding. Then I blocked the number. I wouldn't let Tiffany's bitterness taint this moment. I'd earned this promotion through years of unrecognized work and final months of courage. Her threats were just the last gasp of someone who'd lost their power. Still, as I packed up my desk that afternoon, preparing to move to my new office on the executive floor the following Monday, I couldn't help feeling unsettled. I'd worked alongside Tiffany for 3 years, had seen her charm and manipulate everyone from interns to the VP. She wasn't someone who accepted defeat gracefully. Lisa stopped by as I was carefully wrapping the small jade plant my sister had given me when I joined Horizon. Director Mitchell, she said, grinning. The rumors are true, then? I nodded, returning her smile despite my lingering unease. Officially starts in 2 weeks, but they're moving me upstairs now. Well deserved. She perched on the edge of my desk. A bunch of us are going to McLaren's tonight to celebrate. You have to come. Celebrate what? You! The fall of the tyrants. Lisa laughed. Come on, Claire. For once, let yourself enjoy a victory. She was right. I'd spent too long minimizing my accomplishments, staying in the background while others claimed the spotlight. Maybe it was time to step into it myself. Okay, I agreed. But just for one drink. I still have a lot to process. 1 drink, Lisa promised, though her expression suggested she didn't believe me. 7 o'clock. 1 drink turned into 3. As colleagues, some I barely knew, stopped by our table to congratulate me. Their genuine warmth was surprising. I'd always thought of myself as peripheral to the office social scene, but it seemed my silent competence had earned more respect than I'd realized. I knew something was off when Tiffany got that promotion last year, Mark from accounting confided, leaning in conspiratorially. The numbers in her quarterly reports never added up quite right, but Stephen always signed off anyway. Remember that client presentation she supposedly pulled an all-nighter to fix? Jen from marketing added. The one with all those custom graphics? I saw you working on those same slides 2 days earlier. Story after story emerged. Small observations, moments of confusion, instances where the narrative Tiffany presented didn't align with what others had seen. I hadn't been as invisible as I'd thought. People had noticed. They just hadn't felt empowered to speak up. By the time I got home at 11, pleasantly tipsy and genuinely touched by my colleagues' support, I felt a sense of closure I hadn't expected. The text from Tiffany seemed less threatening in light of the community I'd discovered I had at Horizon. The following Monday, I moved into my new office, smaller than Stephen's, but with a better view of the bay. As I arranged my few personal items, Patricia's assistant appeared in the doorway. Ms. Howard would like you to join the executive meeting in 10 minutes, she informed me. Boardroom 3. I smoothed my new blazer, part of a wardrobe upgrade I'd treated myself to over the weekend, and gathered my tablet and notebook. This would be my first executive meeting as a peer rather than a presenter, and despite my confidence in my abilities, nervousness fluttered in my stomach. The boardroom was already half full when I arrived. Patricia nodded in acknowledgement, gesturing to an empty chair halfway down the table. Not at the far end where junior members usually sat, but among the established directors. A deliberate statement. As the room filled, I noticed the glances cast my way. Some curious, some appraising, none hostile. When Stephen entered last, he hesitated briefly upon seeing me, then took the only remaining seat at the far end of the table. Another deliberate statement, this one from Patricia. Good morning, everyone, Patricia began once all were seated. Before we start our regular agenda, I'd like to introduce Claire Mitchell, our new Director of Operational Excellence. Murmurs of greeting rippled around the table. I nodded in acknowledgement, keeping my expression professional despite the surreal nature of the moment. Claire will be leading our company-wide initiative to streamline processes and improve cross-departmental collaboration, Patricia continued. I expect everyone to provide her with full access to your teams and data as she conducts her initial assessment. Stephen shifted uncomfortably at the far end of the table. His kingdom was about to be examined by someone intimately familiar with its flaws. Now let's move to our first agenda item, Q3 projections. Patricia turned to the CFO, who began a presentation on the company's financial outlook. As the meeting progressed, I took careful notes, speaking only when directly addressed. I was still finding my footing in this new role, and today was about observation rather than assertion. After the meeting, as executives filed out, Stephen approached me. He looked haggard, the confident swagger replaced by a tentative hesitancy. Claire, he began, his voice low. I just wanted to say, I'm sorry, I should have seen what was happening. I studied him, searching for the manipulative boss I'd resented for years. Instead, I saw a middle-aged man whose carefully constructed world had crumbled. Not entirely innocent. He'd enabled Tiffany at every turn, but perhaps not entirely villainous either. Yes, you should have, I agreed, my tone neutral rather than accusatory. But we'll be working together moving forward, so I suggest we focus on that. Relief flickered across his face. He'd expected recrimination, not professionalism. Of course. My team is at your disposal whenever you're ready to begin your assessment. I'll start next week, I replied. And Stephen? I'll be looking at systems, not seeking scapegoats. The goal is improvement, not punishment. He nodded, gratitude evident in his expression, and moved away. Patricia, who'd been observing our interaction from across the room, approached. Well handled, she commented. Many would have taken the opportunity for retribution. I shook my head. Retribution doesn't improve operations. And that's my job now. A smile of approval touched her lips. Exactly why. You're in that chair. She gestured toward my new office. How does it feel? The view from up here? I considered the question, not just the literal view from the executive floor, but the metaphorical perspective of my new position. The power to shape systems rather than just work within them. The authority to ensure that what had happened to me wouldn't happen to others. Clearer, I said finally. I can see further from here. 6 months into my role as Director of Operational Excellence, Horizon Logistics had transformed. The changes weren't just in organizational charts or process flows, though those had certainly improved, but in the company culture itself. Teams that had once operated in isolated silos now collaborated fluidly. Recognition systems highlighted contributions from all levels, not just those with the loudest voices or highest titles. Transparent project tracking meant work couldn't be invisibly reassigned or credit silently stolen. But most striking was the change in people's attitudes. The nervous energy that had once permeated the office, everyone watching their backs, guarding their work, had been replaced by something more open, more genuinely productive. My office door stood open as I reviewed the latest efficiency metrics, satisfaction scores at an all-time high across all departments. A knock at the doorframe pulled my attention up from my tablet. Got a minute? It was Stephen, folders tucked under his arm. Our working relationship had evolved into something I wouldn't quite call friendship, but certainly professional respect. His performance improvement plan had been completed months ago, and to his credit, he'd embraced the changes rather than resisting them. Of course, I replied, gesturing to the chairs across from my desk. The Phoenix Project? He nodded, settling into a seat and spreading several documents between us. We're ahead of schedule and under budget. The client's thrilled. That's what I like to hear, I said, scanning the numbers. The new team structure is working well then? Better than I expected, Stephen admitted. Having 3 team leads instead of 1 project manager distributes the responsibility more effectively. No single point of failure. No single point of failure. It was a phrase I'd used repeatedly during the reorganization, a gentle but pointed reference to the Tiffany-shaped hole that had nearly collapsed several major projects when she left. Stephen's use of it now showed how far we'd come. And the mentoring program? I asked, referring to another initiative I'd launched, pairing senior staff with promising juniors to ensure knowledge transfer and growth opportunities. Lisa's exceeding expectations as a mentor, Stephen replied. She's got a real talent for developing people. The 2 analysts she's working with have already improved their process documentation significantly. I made a mental note to recognize Lisa's contributions at the next department meeting. Unlike in the old days, good work no longer went unacknowledged at Horizon. As Stephen gathered his materials to leave, he hesitated. Have you heard anything? About Tiffany? The question caught me off guard. In, the whirlwind of my new role and the company transformation, I'd thought of Tiffany less and less frequently. After her threatening text, there had been silence. No further contact, no legal challenges to her termination. Nothing. No, I said truthfully. Nothing since she left. Why do you ask? Stephen looked uncomfortable. She reached out to me last week. Wanted me to be a reference for a position at ClearPath Shipping. ClearPath was one of our competitors. Smaller, less established, but growing rapidly in the Pacific Northwest market. The thought of Tiffany potentially repeating her pattern there was troubling. What did you say? I asked carefully. I told her I couldn't in good conscience recommend her, Stephen replied, surprising me. Then I called their HR director, she's an old colleague, and suggested they do very thorough reference checks before making any decisions. I studied him, seeing genuine regret in his expression. That couldn't have been easy, I acknowledged. Easier than living with myself if I helped her do to someone else what she did here, he said simply. As he left my office, I reflected on how profoundly things had changed. Not just systems and structures, but people too. Stephen had been complicit in my exploitation, yes, but he'd also been manipulated by a master. His willingness to protect strangers from a similar fate spoke to his own growth. Later that afternoon, Patricia summoned me to her office. Unlike our previous meetings, this one wasn't scheduled, which sparked a flutter of curiosity as I made my way to the corner office. Claire, she greeted me, gesturing to the now familiar sitting area. Thank you for coming on such short notice. Of course, I replied, noting a thick portfolio on the coffee table between us. Is everything all right? Patricia smiled, a rare, full smile that transformed her usually serious face. More than all right. I've just come from the board meeting where we reviewed your first 6-month impact report. I'd submitted that report the previous week, a comprehensive analysis of the operational improvements since my appointment, complete with metrics on efficiency gains, cost reductions, and employee satisfaction increases. The board is, to put it mildly, impressed, Patricia continued, opening the portfolio to reveal what looked like presentation slides. We've seen a 23% reduction in project delays, a 17% increase in client satisfaction scores, and the highest employee retention rate in 5 years. The entire team deserves credit for embracing the changes, I said automatically, then caught myself. Part of my own growth had been learning to accept recognition for my achievements instead of deflecting it. But thank you. I'm proud of what we've accomplished. As you should be, Patricia affirmed. Which brings me to the reason for this meeting. She slid the portfolio toward me. This is the board's proposal for the next phase of Horizon's evolution. We'd like your input before it's finalized. I leafed through the slides, my pulse quickening as I grasped what I was seeing. A complete corporate restructuring, expanded operations into new markets. And there, on the organizational chart, a new position, Chief Operating Officer, with a line drawn directly to it from my current role. Is this... I looked up at Patricia, unable to complete the question. A promotion path? She nodded. The board believes you're the logical choice to become Horizon's first COO when the restructuring takes effect next quarter. Assuming you're interested, of course. COO. At 31, it would make me the youngest C-suite executive in the company's history, and one of the few women in such a role in the entire industry. I'm definitely interested, I said, professional restraint battling with the urge to grin like a fool. What's the timeline for the transition? 3 months, give or take, Patricia replied. You'll gradually hand off your current responsibilities to a successor, someone you'll select and train, while taking on aspects of the new role. We spent the next hour discussing the details of the transition and my vision for the COO position. As our meeting concluded, Patricia walked me to the door instead of remaining seated as she usually did. Another small sign of our evolving professional relationship. You know, she said, thoughtfully, when you first presented your evidence against Tiffany, I saw someone with potential. But potential is common. What's rare is the ability to transform potential into impact without losing your integrity in the process. You've done that here, Claire. Coming from Patricia Howard, known for her sparing praise, the words meant more than any formal recognition. Thank you, I said. Simply. That means a lot. As I walked back to my office, I reflected on the journey of the past 9 months. From overlooked supervisor to director to pending COO. From silent resentment to confident leadership. From carrying someone else's burden to charting my own course. all because I'd finally said no. The autumn chill had settled over Seattle as I stood in my new corner office, gazing out at the gray waters of Elliott Bay. Rain tapped gently against the floor-to-ceiling windows, creating a soothing backdrop to my thoughts. In 2 hours, Patricia would announce my promotion to COO at the company-wide town hall. My new nameplate, Claire Mitchell, Chief Operating Officer, waited in a box on my desk, ready to be installed after the official announcement. 3 knocks at my open door pulled me from my reflection. Lisa stood there, a manila envelope in her hands, and an uncharacteristically serious expression on her face. "Got a minute?" she asked, echoing Stephen's familiar greeting. Over the past 9 months, she'd been promoted twice. First to team lead when I moved to the director role, then to operations manager when her mentoring talents became evident to the wider leadership team. "Always for you," I replied, gesturing to my sitting area, a deliberate replica of Patricia's, designed to create a comfortable space for honest conversations. "What's up?" Lisa settled into one of the armchairs, turning the envelope in her hands. "This came to the reception desk for you this morning," she said, passing it to me. "The courier said it was important but didn't require a signature." The envelope was unmarked except for my name and Horizon's address typed on a plain label. No return address, no company logo, nothing to indicate its origin. A faint sense of unease prickled at the back of my neck as I carefully opened it. Inside was a folded newspaper clipping and a single sheet of cream-colored stationery. I unfolded the clipping first. A business announcement from the San Diego Tribune, dated 2 weeks earlier. "ClearPath Shipping closes Seattle office amid fraud investigation," the headline read. I scanned the article quickly, my eyes catching on key phrases. Financial discrepancies discovered during routine audit. Former executive assistant Tiffany Rhodes named in internal investigation. Allegations of misrepresented credentials. And project results. Tiffany had followed her pattern at ClearPath, it seemed. But this time she'd been caught much earlier, before she could embed herself as deeply as she had at Horizon. I set the clipping aside and unfolded the stationery. The handwritten note was brief but impactful. "Claire, I thought you should know that your warning saved us from a more significant loss. After our conversation, I insisted on a probationary period and closer supervision for Ms. Rhodes. The irregularities became apparent within weeks. Thank you for your professional courtesy. The shipping industry is smaller than most realize. We should have coffee sometime. Regards, Jennifer Whitman, HR Director, ClearPath Shipping." "Tiffany?" Lisa asked, noting my expression. I nodded, passing her the clipping, but keeping the note private. As Lisa read, her eyes widened. "Wow," she said finally. "I guess some people never learn. Or they learn the wrong lessons," I amended. Tiffany was incredibly talented in many ways. Her presentation skills, her ability to read people, she just chose to use those talents to take shortcuts instead of doing the actual work. "Do you think she'll try again somewhere else?" Lisa asked, handing back the clipping. I considered the question. Probably. People like Tiffany rarely see themselves as the problem, but her reputation will make it harder each time. I tucked both items back into the envelope, a chapter closing definitively. "Speaking of actual work, how's the team handling the new project management system?" We spent the next half hour discussing department matters. Lisa updating me on challenges and successes, me offering guidance or resources where needed. Our working relationship had evolved into an effective partnership, with Lisa now stepping confidently into the role I'd once occupied. As she was leaving, she paused at the door. "Almost forgot. We're all gathering at McLaren's after the town hall to celebrate. You'll be there, right?" A year ago, I might have demurred, citing work or fatigue. The old Claire had kept colleagues at a professional distance, too focused on proving herself through work to invest in relationships. The new Claire understood that leadership meant connection, not isolation. Wouldn't miss it, I promised. Alone again, I moved to my desk to review my talking points for the town hall. As COO, my first initiative would be expanding Horizon's mentorship program company-wide, creating structured pathways for talented employees to grow while ensuring no one's contributions went unrecognized or unrewarded. A soft knock interrupted my preparation. Stephen stood in the doorway, a small gift bag in hand. "I wanted to give you this before the announcement," he said, crossing to place the bag on my desk. A small congratulations. Inside was a sleek, leather-bound notebook with my initials and new title embossed on the cover. A thoughtful, professional gift that acknowledged our complicated history while respecting our current working relationship. "Thank you, Stephen," I said sincerely. "It's perfect." He nodded, clearly relieved I'd received it in the spirit intended. "You've earned this, Claire." Not just the promotion, but the respect. Everyone sees it. Coming from Stephen, who had once been blind to my contributions, the acknowledgement carried particular weight. That means a lot, I told him, especially from you. After he left, I returned to the window, watching raindrops trace patterns down the glass. So much had changed in a year. The person I'd been, overworked, undervalued, silently, resentful, seemed like a stranger now. A text from Patricia interrupted my musings. Town hall in 30, ready? I texted back a simple ready and gathered my materials. As I headed for the elevator, colleagues smiled and nodded, some offering quiet congratulations, though the announcement wasn't yet official. News traveled fast at Horizon. But now, unlike in the Tiffany era, that transparency was intentional and positive. The company auditorium was packed when I entered through the side door. Patricia was already on stage, reviewing quarterly results with her characteristic precision. I took my place in the front row beside other executives, catching supportive glances from several. As Patricia transitioned to organizational announcements, my phone vibrated with an incoming email. Normally, I wouldn't check during a meeting, but something prompted me to glance down. The sender's name made my breath catch. Tiffany Rhodes. Subject line, congratulations. I hesitated, then opened it, bracing for bitterness or threats. Claire, I heard about your promotion. Congratulations. I won't pretend things ended well between us or that I agree with how everything played out. But recent events have forced some difficult reflections. You were right about one thing. Success built on taking credit for others' work isn't sustainable. I'm learning that lesson the hard way. Good luck in your new role. Tiffany. No apology, no admission of wrongdoing beyond the vague reference to recent events. But also no hostility, no accusations. It was perhaps as close to accountability as Tiffany would ever come. I closed the email without responding as Patricia called my name, inviting me to join her on stage. The applause that greeted me as I stood was genuine and enthusiastic. Not the polite acknowledgement I'd received in the past, but real recognition from colleagues who had seen my journey. As Patricia officially announced my promotion to Chief Operating Officer, I surveyed the faces before me, Lisa beaming proudly, Stephen nodding with respectful approval, team members who had grown under my leadership, colleagues who had become friends. For years, I'd believed that hard work alone would eventually be recognized, that keeping my head down and shouldering others' burdens was the path to success. I'd been wrong. It wasn't until I stood up for myself, until I said no to exploitation and yes to my own value, that things changed. The real victory wasn't the promotion, the corner office, or the impressive title. It was finding my voice and using it, not just for myself, but to create a workplace where everyone's contributions were seen and valued. When Patricia handed me the microphone, I took a moment to absorb the significance of where I stood, not just physically on the stage, but at the culmination of a journey from invisibility to leadership. Thank you, I began, my voice steady and clear. A year ago, I was sitting where you are now, watching someone else receive recognition while I remained in the shadows. Today, I stand here not just as your new COO, but as living proof that your work deserves to be acknowledged, your voice deserves to be heard, and your worth deserves to be recognized. I paused, looking out at the sea of attentive faces. At Horizon, we're building something different, a culture where success isn't about taking credit, but about creating value, where leadership isn't about titles, but about lifting others up, where your contributions will never again go unseen or unappreciated. As applause filled the auditorium, I felt a profound sense of completion. The journey that had begun with a simple, powerful no had led me here, not just to professional success, but to something far more valuable, the integrity of being truly seen for who I was and what I contributed. In that moment, I knew with absolute certainty that I had reclaimed not just my career, but myself.